thank you so much for the opportunity to be able to engage with the portfolio committee on the work that we did for the 24-25 financial year on the police and its portfolios. Last time we had presentations, so we thought maybe the committee members still had them, so we did not bring them, so we do apologize. Okay, I see I'm getting thumbs up. We do apologize, committee members, but we do have the slides, and we did submit them last time. So please move to the next slide. So I will just take a brief introduction into the slides that we're presenting today, and then, like I said, Ms. Nelson Mshongo will then take you through the rest of the presentation. And the first slide that we start with in all our presentation is our mission. And yes, maybe we see it in all presentations, but for us it's important that we remind of ourselves of why we exist as the Office of the AGSA. And the session today really confirms that, or realizes that mission that we have, where we are here to enable oversight, accountability, and governance through the work that we do. We are here to empower the committee with some of the findings that we were able to get when we're doing our work, so that the committee is able to exercise its oversight responsibility on the department and its entities. On the right side of the slide, it's what we have developed as the Office of the AGSA as a framework of what we believe that if the government has these four main characteristics, or the culture looks like this, we should see that the environment is then effective. So it's four main areas that we look at. The first one is the performance. There are certain areas where they are not meeting their mandate, and the conversation are certain areas where they are not meeting their mandate, and the conversation is to say, what does it mean from a mandate perspective? What does it mean from a strategic objectives perspective? We then look at the pillar, what we call accountability, and this is what we speak a lot as the Office of the AGSA across government, because accountability, sometimes this is where we see a lot of the entities and departments struggle. What we want to see is, we want to see a government that is responsive to the public, oversight to other stakeholders. This means that they are able to report when they are required to report, and they are able to present an account to what they did with the money that this portfolio committee approved for. So we want to see that accountability, and also them taking actions against decisions made, them holding people accountable in instances of non-compliance and non-adherence. So that's what the accountability framework pillar looks at. Transparency is one of the areas that we look at, where we really believe that a department and entity that has transparency, it allows for accountability. This pillar really looks at the fact that they are able to submit the annual performance report, the annual financial statements, so that stakeholders are able to review and look at what they did with the money that was approved. Not just submitting it, but they need to be timely and reliable. Sometimes we see the fact that the departments do submit, but they're not reliable. Reliable for us means the fact that those financial statements or those annual performance reports are supported by evidence. Evidence that says, if we are reporting a specific performance, this is the evidence that is feeding to that performance. So that is the transparency pillar that we actually look at. The last one that we look at is institutional integrity. And this is big across government. This talks to the leadership, the integrity posture of the leadership within the department and the entity, because they need to lead by example. Are they behaving ethically when they are doing business? Are they complying with the laws and regulations? Are they acting in the best interest of the departments on the entity? So those are the four main areas. So throughout the presentation, you will see the theme coming out, where we reflect on performance, where we reflect on accountability and consequence management, where we reflect on the reliability of the information being produced, and lastly, where we react on some of them, if there's any areas of compliance with laws and regulations. Please move to the next slide. And this slide is also one of the slides that we also always present to the committee, that talks to the accountability ecosystem. And what we're really saying as the Office of the AGSA is the fact that if we want to see change in government, it is really a matter of all hands on deck. So everybody that has been given the responsibility, whether it's from the PFMA, whether it's from any legislation that is out there, or whether it's from the jobs that when the contract that they sign when they're hired, everybody needs to make sure that they do their job, their part. And in this ecosystem, honorable chair members, we start with the left, which talks to the officials. And it's important that the officials, as the point of entry, they do that which they were hired for. So it's important that we have officials that are capable of doing the work that they're doing, and they're in the right positions and they're doing the right thing, so that we are able to see movement. We then see senior management that are responsible for resourcing the departments, that are responsible for making sure that they empower the officials that they are leading and they hold them accountable. So that is the conversation that we have to say, if officials are not doing their job, what is senior management doing to make sure that they empower them, to make sure that they give them the resources to be able to do their jobs? We then look at the accounting officer, which and the accounting authorities. And what's so nice about it is, even in the PFMA, the responsibilities of those accounting officers and accounting authorities is clear. They are supported by internal audit and audit committees, and that's what we have also been emphasizing. Audit committee is usually there in the departments and the entities throughout the year. The office of the AGSA we usually come at the tail end of things. So it's important that the internal audit functions that has been established within these entities are able, are capacitated to be able to do their job. It's important that when internal audit raises the finding, the department and the entities, they really take those findings to heart, because more often than not, some of the findings that we raise as the office of the AGSA, internal audit had raised them. But the way there was a slow response to some of those findings from the internal audit, and therefore we then result with the audit outcomes we see. So we are really advocating for internal audit work to really be prioritized as well, so that they are able to fix things during the year, and we are able to avoid some of the findings that we have. Audit committee as well, they are responsible for overseeing the internal audit work. So we are also saying they must continue to advocate for the internal audit work. They must continue to make sure that the findings that internal audit that raises, it's actually addressed. We then also have the minister. On the right, we have the support and oversight, which also includes this committee, where we are saying we would really want to empower you to be able to hold them accountable. We also have other entities that and departments that support the departments, like, for example, National Treasury, as they set some of the standards, as well as DPME. In the middle, it's us, the Office of the AGSA, where we continuously reconfirm our role, that our role is to audit. And in the audit work that we do, we'll provide insights, we'll influence and we'll enforce. You also see throughout the presentation, we have areas where we are bringing insights, where we are saying this is what we are observing. We have areas where we have enforced. So ours is to reconfirm that. And last but not least, we also have the active citizenry, because before we are anything else, we are citizens, and we also have a role to play. The role of complying with the laws and regulations of the land, the roles of holding people accountable that we have really voted for. So we also include them as citizens to say we also have our part to play. So in the main, this is the accountability ecosystem. What we're saying is, if one of that role player is not doing their job, we then have a problem with the whole ecosystem. So we all need to do our part. The next slide is just a summary of the ecosystem in the portfolio policy. We're not going to go through that. And the next slide that we have is the reflection on the last year recommendations. More often than not, we realize that we have these sessions, we leave recommendations, but sometimes we don't follow up enough to make sure that these recommendations are implemented. So what we do is we now start with a reflection to say, we were here last year. These are the recommendations we had given the police and the entities. These are the recommendations we actually conveyed to the committee. And what we want to see is, we want to reflect on how are they doing. And that's why we include. And for us, one of the recommendations we put in the committee is, even in the quarterly conversations, when the department and entities are tabling their quarterly report, we need to first take a step back and say, hang on, there were specific recommendations that were provided by the Auditor General. How are we doing on a quarterly basis, so that we track them, to avoid us only checking them 12 months later, and then we realize that there are things that did not happen. So we are really recommending to the committee that these recommendations on a quarterly basis, as the department and the entities come and present, this should be the starting point to say, how are we doing on what the AGSA has recommended? So a quick reflection. I won't really go through all of them, because the rest of the presentation is really a reflection on whether those recommendations were implemented. For example, we had a recommendation around the ICVPS. There's a reflection that we've included on what we are seeing happening within the ICVPS. We had the recommendations on the stumbling block around what's preventing the department from achieving its service delivery mandate. You will see there is a presentation we have even on FSL on what we are seeing as stumbling block and what's happening. We also have a section where we're going to reflect on IP and the backlog cases that they have and what they've done so far. We also had a recommendation that has to do with the performance information, around the validation of performance information. On the section where we reflect on the annual performance report, you'll be able to see if these recommendations have been implemented or not, and what is the status so far. We have also a recommendation around monitoring, make sure that they comply with the financial reporting framework. The audit outcomes we have will still then confirm if something was done to ensure that they respond to that. And last but not least, we also had a recommendation last year on compliance with laws and regulations. And you'd see we are still reporting on compliance with laws and regulations. The question is, are they implementing the recommendation that we have provided for them? And the last slide that I'm going to cover is just really a high level of the audit outcomes that we have. Like I said, I don't want to take Nelisiwe's shine, but when we look at this picture that we have from the 23-24 and where we are, it seems like this portfolio is not moving from an audit outcomes perspective. So the portfolio remained the same. So we do congratulate CSPS and IP for maintaining the clean audit outcomes, but unfortunately the department is still staying in the yellow. So therefore we need to have a conversation to say, what will it take to shift the dial? What will it take to make sure that we see the department also moving into the green? And unfortunately, even CIRA, they are still sitting in the qualification. So for us, we then relook at when we raise each and every finding within the entity, there is recommendations we include, and there is an action plan that is developed. So if we are going to include an action plan for each finding, the question then we need to then be asking is, what is happening with those action plans? Is it a matter of maybe the action plans were not addressing the real root cause, or is it a matter that maybe some of these things will take 3 years to clear? But we need to have a conversation to say, what will it take for this portfolio to move, and we are able to see that both SAPS and PCRA join the two audits that are clean, but also even for those that are clean, that they don't regress. More often as well, we see auditors clean, and then they are unable to sustain it. So we also need to make sure that they don't also relax, because then would result in a regression. So that is really our message. So I'm going to hand over to Nelisiwe, who's going to go into the detail of what led to the picture that we see today. Over to you.
Okay. Thanks so much, Tabel. Good morning, Honorable Chair, Honorable Members, Minister, Deputy Minister, National Commissioner, and all protocol observed. I think I'll start on the next slide, Chairperson. I think Tabelo has sort of reflected on the stagnation that we have in the audit outcomes of SAPS, which also continue to remain a concern. But I'll just go right straight to some of the root causes that we are seeing, because the breakdown of what has actually caused the picture that we are seeing, I'll deal with it as in the slides that are continue. But we continue seeing the slow progress of implementation of action plans or of audit action plans around AOPO that is continuously causing the fact that the department together with PCRA are not moving to where they needed to move. The lack of implementation on consequence management. There's a number of instruction notes that we know the National Commissioner, as well as the legislation that is specific on what members need to do and what they need to follow. But however, where something or somewhere there's non-compliance or non-adherence, we continue seeing the lack of action, especially on consequence management, to actually correct the action and deal with the issues that are in the area. We continue seeing issues around the PCRA areas. So there's a high reliance on external service provider. Sometimes that it also impacts on them as an entity to be able to deal with their own data and billing systems. But more so as well, there is a lack of review of financial statements to ensure that they deal with the qualification that is currently sitting them. So, Chairperson, I'd like to move to the next slide. And in the next slide, we start breaking down the areas of issues or areas of audit outcomes in terms of this portfolio. And we deal with the credibility and the submitted financial statements as they were given to us. So as of 31 May every year, we would receive these financial statements. Then we'll have an opportunity to audit them. And once we've audited them, we'll give management opportunities to correct. In these portfolios, 3 of these institutions that are here, Department of Police, IPID, together with CSPS, they've submitted financial statements that are free from any material misstatements. So meaning that during that process, there was no any corrections that were made by this institution. And we commend those institutions to be able to continue implementing those internal controls. However, the concern remains in the PCERA. When we came with the 2023-2024 audit outcomes, PCERA was qualified in 2 areas of their financial statement. One, they had issues in their cash flow statement, and they had some prior period errors that they tried to correct that they couldn't support at that time, and we came here and we presented the qualified audit opinion. In the current year, the matters around the cash flow statement were resolved as we did not qualify that area. However, the concerns still remain with the prior period error of correcting some of the debtors' balances. Key issues that we sort of identify in that area is the fact that there is some of those debtors that they were trying to correct, that the information was not submitted for audit or the information was not complete. In some areas where they submitted the information, there were errors or there were disagreements between what they've submitted and what we were calculating, and therefore ultimately it led to the qualification of that audit report in terms of the financial statements. And we continue to say that this entity needed to deal with the issues of being able to properly review the financial statements to make sure that they submit those financial statements that are free from any errors. So I move to the next area. In the next area, we are dealing with compliance with laws and regulations. We've already dealt with the fact that CSPS and IPIT are clean. Therefore, there are no material findings in the audit report in terms of compliance. But however, concern remains on these 2 institutions of the portfolio, SAPS together with CERA. On the procurement and contract management, for a number of years at the Department of Police, we've been raising issues around the ability to be able to comply with laws and regulations in that area. But together in the current year, we've identified that even CERA have had issues in terms of complying with some of the procurement prescripts in this space. As well as quality of financial statements, this was raised in PCERA. I've already dealt with in the previous slide where I talked about the material misstatements that are there. The prevention of irregular expenditure. Both PCERA and the Department of Police continue to have balances that are increasing in terms of irregular expenditure. You would recall PFMA says the accounting officer must prevent incurrence of any irregular expenditure. So if you look at from the perspective of PCERA, they went and exceeded the budget as per what was approved, and also contributed to them incurring the irregular expenditure, but they also had some non-compliance in the procurement. The SAPS one is mostly around the compliance with procurement laws and regulation. As well at CERA, there's a revenue management non-compliance that we've identified. This deals or talks directly to their ability to be able to collect any debts that are due to the entity. So what happened in the last year is that they actually appointed 4 service providers who are supposed to assist them in collecting some of these outstanding debtors. But however, we continue to see a high number of those debtors that are provided for as impairment or is likely not to be recovered. So we also are concerned in the fact that you are relying on these external parties, but you have, however, not also monitoring these external parties who are doing this debt collection for you, but you continue as well to have a high impairment rate. And that is why we're saying their revenue management process needs to be continuously improved in that area. The issues that we identify at Department of Police also have to do in terms of how they are evaluating their bids, because too many of the bids that we identify, you find that there's inconsistencies between what they continuously or what they put as an advertisement and how these bids are evaluated. And at the end of the day, then you find some unfairness in terms of the procurement of the areas. So, Chairperson, I'd like to move to the next slide where we are really unpacking the irregular expenditure of this portfolio. CSPS and IPIT did incur some, but they are, however, not so material in terms of the whole portfolio as we look at them. As you would see, because of the Department of Police, they have the bigger budget and they are the biggest contributor in terms of this area. Chairperson, I think I'd like to just reflect on the fact that about 650 million of irregular expenditure was disclosed by Department of Police in the current year, and it's a big shift or an increase of that of the prior year. Within this 600 million, there's about 184 million identified in the current year, but it relates to contracts or expenditure that we incurred in prior years. But because they had to disclose it for the first time in the current year, it is included in that balance of 667 million. Some of the key issues that we are also identifying, or matters that we have found that are leading to the irregular expenditure, is obviously the breach of the 5 pillars. We continue talking about the equitable fairness, cost effectiveness, the transparency of the competitive process. We find that there's inconsistent application of their pre-qualifying criteria that they advertise in the bids. The suppliers who score the highest scores are not awarded the bids. The bid awarded to suppliers who did not meet all phases of the continuous evaluation, and bids that were not, or bids that were responsive, will be unfairly disqualified. There are risks that go with such findings. One, as well, is exposing the department to some litigations that are likely to come because of unfairness of some of those bids, but more so the continuous increase in the irregular expenditure, which we've been advocating and have been discussing with the National Commissioner to actually properly deal with the issues that we are finding in the procurement space. So within that, there's a 52.8 million in the current year that we identify, but however, that 52.8 million of irregular expenditure is still under assessment. This is aligned to the framework as it's issued by National Treasury of giving the department time to go confirm and identify some of those. It's not disclosed in this one, but once confirmed, it's likely to be disclosed as irregular expenditure in the next following year. Chairperson, I'd like to deal with slide 12. The slide 12 deals with the complete balance of irregular expenditure, and this is the balance that is sitting in the annual report. You would not see it in the face of the financial statement, but however, this is the balance that is in the annual report. There's a 3.1 billion in the current year as is disclosed. So what you would see over the number of years, as and when irregular expenditure is incurred, the department or the entities will go perform determination tests, confirm it, do investigations, and as well institute consequence management. But however, there needs to be a complete process where you need to remove all this irregular expenditure so that it's either written off or condoned by National Treasury or the proper appropriate structures. But however, we are saying this portfolio has not been able to properly deal with this because some of this irregular has not been condoned or has not been removed. So we are actually recommending the department as well as the entities to properly deal with that irregular expenditure. But in the block we have on the right, we just giving high-level analysis of at what stage or different stages of some of this irregular expenditure as they are sitting in the different books of the entities as we have them. Chairperson, I'd like to move to the next slide, which is slide 13, and this is a slide I'd really like to spend a little bit of time in because it then reflects one of those areas that SEPS is really struggling with, and one of the reasons why they continuously are sitting in that block of unqualified but with findings together with the ones I dealt with in the compliance. So performance information is another area we've been coming, whether it's us as we advocate and try and influence the department to be able to deal with the issues that are sitting there. So you would see in the portfolio, the 3 other institutions that are there, they don't have any material issues that were reported in the audit report. But however, the Department of Police, or SEPS, is the one that continuously have had issues or findings as we've reported in the last couple of years. So in the current year, we saw regression in terms of the indicators that we are qualifying or the indicators that had material findings in the audit report. So on program 2, which is visible policing as well as detective services, there is findings within that. I think the actual indicators have been reflected somewhere. One of the key things that we are finding as root causes that are causing this is the timeous and adequate reviews at police station level that we say will assist in eliminating some of these findings that we continue seeing. In the current year as well, there are some indicators that we did not have material findings on, but we do know that management were given an opportunity to adjust some of those. So what if it wasn't for the fact that we allowed the adjustment, it means that there would have been more indicators that had material findings. We have about 30% of reported achievement of indicators on the 2 selected programs that are not reliable. And then we still have about 4% of the indicators, I think it's about 2 indicators, that have been excluded in the annual performance plan, and therefore the departments did not get to report on them. And I'd just like to highlight some of the key issues at an overall level that we continue seeing in terms of performance information. We are just saying there's a lack of strong leadership and oversight and monitoring at station level, together with district level as well as provincial level. We are saying with performance information, yes, there are issues that we identify at the station level, but the matters are also matters that should be dealt with even at the district level, at the provincial level. So meaning that the responsibility does not only lie with the station commander, but it goes throughout the whole value chain in terms of dealing with the cases. Detective commanders who are not always validating some of the arrests and the cases as we find them in the performance information that is not aligned to the TID. Some of the commanders who are not updating the investigation diaries that needed to validate some of the leads that are identified and that have been reported. We continue to see issues around the docket management and controls where dockets are not always or timeously being able to be retrieved for audit purposes. Some duplicates were identified in the performance information, so meaning that a certain case will be duplicated in 2 or in number of indicators, which makes overstatement on one of the indicators. But Chairperson, these are just areas that are in the performance information that this department must continuously need to deal with it. In the next slide, which is slide 14, we are talking about the achievement of targets and indicators. I think Tabelo talked to it when he was talking to the party principles, where he was talking about performance and the entities and the department's ability to actually achieve their key mandate targets. So we find that this is only limited to those programs we've audited, so meaning SEPS is the 2 programs, CSPS I think is the 1 program, as well as IPIT 1 program, as well as PCERA. So the concern may be sitting in the underachievement in the other department as well, but we also highlight which other of these key targets and indicators that have not been achieved by the Department of Police. You'd see one of them that we are highlighting. We are talking about the DNA cases and exhibits entries, and we are reflecting somewhere in our insight messages and some of the issues that we are finding in terms of backlog cases that are sitting with that unit of forensic lab laboratory. Chairperson, I think slide 15, we want to deal with the governance processes of the portfolio, but the message here in overall is the fact that the audit committees of that portfolio are there and are functioning, but however, there's room for improvement in terms of also encouraging the other two entities that remain not to be moving or that are not in the clean audit space, in the fact that those audit committees need to put a little bit more effort to assist the department. But we acknowledge the effort that have already been done by some of these committees in being able to deal with some of the findings. But we reflect as well on the effectiveness of the internal audit, the effectiveness of the internal audit of the Department of Police. Yes, the position of the head of the internal audit remained vacant for more than 24 months with an acting person being appointed there. But however, we also note the fact that there's a lot of findings that are raised by the internal audit of the department that are almost similar to what we have. But however, management is not actioning or actually correcting some of those issues. So even by the time we come in, we find that internal auditor has already raised it, but management is not actioning and responding to some of them. And we see that in a lot of areas that we identify. We are concerned about PCERA, who in the last financial year have actually used three firms to perform their internal audit. Their internal audit function is outsourced, which is a norm for, especially for the smaller organizations or entities that we have in government. But however, we found that they've employed about three service providers to do this function in the last year. So therefore, there was no effectiveness or there was no sufficient time for some of the firms to actually do some of the first level review and the reviews that are required for their internal controls. I'd like to move on from the slide, Chairperson,